Hello, welcome back to the Night. In this chapter, we're going to look at the sixth move, bishop d3. Position arises after moves e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and now bishop d3. This is both a very old and a very new system. It's a system that's been played in one of the very first games that I saw in the database, played in the Night variation. And then it's not been played that much at the highest level, but it made its comeback recently due to various new ideas that White found. The system is not yet all too popular in the club and amateur level, but I believe that these things, they often go together. As soon as some high-rated players, some high-profile players have good results with it, then the amateurs and club players that are looking up to their heroes usually follow along as well. So I believe this system is going to be a lot more popular very soon too. Now, it used to be considered that g6 is very, very good here. The dragon setup seemed attractive, especially against the short castle. Black thought to play with bishop g7 castle and have a pretty good position. But then it transpired a few years ago that White can play with the long castle setups even here, and he can play f3 or bishop e3 first, and after bishop g7, bishop e3, he can still go for the long castle plans for this so-called English attack setup. And even with the bishop on d3, which is not doing much, this is still quite dangerous for black. And although it's certainly playable, I recommend e5. Also, as you know, my rule that I mention constantly in this series, whenever e5 system is possible, then I prefer to go for it. Against e5, White usually plays knight d2. He can of course also play knight f3 or knight b3, but then there's very little use of the bishop on d3, and we just follow our usual development scheme with bishop e7, castle, bishop e6, knight b7, and so on, where the bishop on d3 is not better than it is usually on e2. So knight e2 is the main point of this line. White intends to bring the knight to g3 when bishop on d3 is actually pretty well placed. Already in this position, black has quite some choice. I recommend a simple move bishop e7, but as we'll see, there are some different move order subtleties, and some players start with bishop e6 or knight c6. In fact, knight c6 was the choice of Ding Liren in his recent games in online tournament 2020. So there are definitely possibilities, but I recommend bishop e7. And after 8 castle, here there are two different moves that I'd like to recommend: bishop e6 and short castle. Now I should explain you what are the differences to a unsuspecting observer. They might seem identical, but there are quite substantial differences. So the idea is that if black castles, White goes for knight g3 usually, and now if black goes bishop e6, White plays knight to d5. And the idea is that if we take on d5 twice, knight d5, ad bishop d5, White can take on h7 with the check, and after king h7, recapture our bishop. And having done this unusual trade, we have achieved a peculiar position, which we'll also look at, by the way, in great detail. I believe black is not doing all too bad, but this is something that White certainly can aim for. Instead, if we start with bishop e6, now if White plays knight g3, we can play knight c6, and now knight d5 is not the same because we can take on d5, e5, bishop d5. There is no more bishop h7 check because the king is on e8, and after bishop a6, as we will see, things are quite different. This is not a check anymore. So that is the advantage of the move bishop e6. The disadvantage is, however, as we know in the Night, whenever the bishop is on e6, the move f4 becomes a lot more interesting suddenly. White wants to push with f5. And here, black has to take on f4, and this is a position we will study also in some detail. Now, after castle, f4 obviously is a lot less dangerous, as f5 does not come with a tempo. So these are the differences, but both in fact are quite interesting, so I will give you both options. First, let's look at the move bishop e6. Castle is played a lot more often. Yeah, here if knight g3, as I mentioned, knight c6 is the point. Now white plays knight d5. What else? If he makes a random move, we can castle, but also after, for example, king h1, we have some extra option like h5, kicking the knight from g3. After knight d5, we take on d5, e5, bishop d5, and now, yeah, white follows up with bishop a6, but now it's quite different. First of all, we have the option of bishop g2. After bishop b7, we play rook a7, king g2, rook to b7 with a very unusual position. White has 3 pawns on the queen side, but rather weak king. And also, we can play after bishop a6, knight d4, protecting the b7 pawn. This way, as the bishop from d5 now has a full overview over the diagonal, and also making sure that d5 square is under our control. And in the long run, our central pawns matter quite a bit. So this is for knight g3, but the most critical move is, of course, knight f4. Here we have to capture, and this is a common structure that we had seen also in the bishop e2, e5, knight b3 system, when the bishop is on e2 and the knight is on b3. But here things are quite different. The knight is on f4, which has its advantages. The knight controls d5 square very well, also puts pressure on the bishop. So it's a specific position that we should address separately. Now, main move is bishop e3. If white captures on e6, we can take back, and after bishop c4, we can protect the pawn on e6 with queen d7. As you know, the pawn on e6 does a pretty good job controlling the d5 square, which is very important. And one important nuance in this particular position is that white cannot play knight a4, which would be a problem with bishop e3 and short castle included. After knight a4 immediately, we have a strong move b5. White wanted obviously to play knight b6 with a fork, but after d5, knight b6, there is the move queen a7, a very strong switch, and we pin the b6 knight. And after that, obviously, also the c4 bishop is hanging, so here white is losing some material. If white plays a4, stopping b5, yeah, then it's just a position. After castle, we're doing pretty well. e6 pawn is well protected. If need be, we can play rook a to e8, bishop to d8, activating the bishop via this diagonal. And overall, it's a very decent position for black. With these pawns on e6 and d6, we control the center quite well. That's for knight takes e6. Bishop e3 is much more critical. And here we should start with knight e5. We should not castle. And that is important. If we castle now, then knight e6, f e6, bishop c4 is already very dangerous because of the queen d7. White has knight a4, and this diagonal is well protected, so b5 is out of the picture. Here black is in some trouble. Instead of castle, we start with knight e5. The knight anyway belongs here, so not a problem, but important to get our move orders right. And here white can play differently. In general, just a position. Of course, white can make any move, but I believe one way or the other he should probably play a4 sooner or later. It's not only stopping b5, but also trying to get a grip on the queen side with a5, fixing the b6 square. And now I propose to castle, and then pretty much regardless of what white does, I propose a very straightforward regroup. Knight f to d7, followed by bishop g5, and setting up an X-ray here against the e3 bishop and activating the e7 bishop and reinforcing the e5 knight. Black also has many other plans. For example, there is a plan of queen to d7, rook a to e8, and then bishop d8. It's also possible always to start with rook c8 first, and also rook e8. But I think knight f d7, bishop g5 is the most universal plan and the one I'd like to recommend. Here I looked at two moves. There are obviously many moves white can play, but I think these two are most principled: a5 and bishop d4. Bishop d4 is very sensible. White is trying to get out of this bishop g5 X-ray potentially after knight f d7. I, in general, recommend not to start with rook c8. I think it's better to save that move, and as we'll see in some cases, a rook might have a future on other files than the c file. Knight d7, knight cd5, usually how white reacts. And here we get bishop g5, activating the bishop. Now white has already left from this x-ray with the bishop on d4, and he can try to play c3, intending bishop c2. And now I recommend to simplify the position with bishop takes f4. If white takes with the rook, we play queen g5, threatening bishop d5. And once white addresses that, we can bring the a8 rook to e8, which is one of the reasons why we postpone rook c8. The rook might be doing quite well on the e file as well. The other rook on f8, guarding the potentially the pawn on f5. As the f file is open, it is good to have the rook on f8. Instead of rook f4, move 16, white can also take with the knight. Here I recommend to trade on d3, simplify the position a bit. Our other knight will join stand on e5 after queen d3, knight e5, and yeah, this position is rather simplified, and it's a very interesting position. We have this very strong knight on e5. White in his turn has the d5 square, a strong bishop on d4 here and here, but things are not so simple. After queen g3, we should first stabilize the position with queen e7, bring the rook from a8 to e8, and then black has various ways to regroup. I think we shouldn't play too passive. We shouldn't let white consolidate here. We have various ideas of counterplay. For example, f6, queen f7, then send the bishop somewhere to c4, b3, or d7, c6. And sometimes also there is the possibility for the f5 push. But first, we should definitely bring the rook to e8. Yeah, after a5, rook e8. In this position, I stopped the analysis. But basically, f6, queen f7 is perhaps our next moves. And in all these positions, in these static positions, it's important to always be on the lookout for active possibilities, for some counter chances, because it seems as though nothing's happening, but there are always opportunities, and we should not forget to put the pressure on the e4 pawn. Overall, I think such a scenario is pretty fine for black. Instead of threatening bishop d4, I also look at threatening a5, immediately grabbing some space here on the queen side. And now I think it's very interesting to play knight f7 first. Rook c8 has been played in Sashikran Chiparinov, played in Spanish League 2019. Both players are very known theoreticians. But here, after rook c8, white played bishop d4, knight d7, knight cd5. Then after bishop g5, white could play c3, intending bishop c2, where I believe white has a pretty good version of things. The rook on c8 turned out to be quite useless. And so I propose knight d7 right away. Now after knight cd5, bishop g5. If white plays now c3, we have the option of bishop takes d5. And after knight d5, we get to trade dark squared bishops. I think the trade of dark squared bishops is very favorable for us, as we got this even more control over the e5 square, more dominance over the e5 square, and we might also open the queen side with the move b6, get rid of this bind, of this strong a5 pawn, and the bind on the b6 square. So I think very decent position for black here. If white plays 15 bishop d4, intending c3, now we have a very clever move, knight c5, stopping c3, because after c3 knights are overloaded. After bishop d5, white will lose some material there. And otherwise, without c3, it's not easy for white. The bishop on d3 is misplaced, and we can always trade a couple of light pieces. And but probably next we will play rook c8 first, keeping all the options open. All in all, such a position is around balanced, I believe. But I think a very interesting and important new idea to play knight f7 before rook c8, and I think that that is a good way of solving black's problems in these structures. That is for 8 bishop e6, certainly a very playable, interesting idea. But the main line is short castle, move 8. Here, knight g3 followed by knight d5 after bishop e6 is the main line, but white has also a few options, so let's look at that. If white plays h3, now we get a similar position as to what we just looked at. after knight c6, f4, e takes f4, but white has here committed to the move h3, which is not the most useful move. So this is just a better version for black of the 8 bishop e6 line. After f4, we take on f4, knight takes f4, bishop e6, bishop e3, knight e5. Again, a very similar story. After a4, once again, we can play knight d7. Here we could also play rook c8, but I think it's still better not to commit the rook. Knight d7 is pretty good. After knight cd5, bishop g5. Now we're threatening once again bishop takes d5, when we would like to also trade the dark squared bishops. And after bishop d4, I like again to play knight c5, not allow white to regroup the pieces with c3, bishop c2. A good version for black. The move h3 is not the most useful move, so I believe it's quite fine for black. If white plays another waiting move like 9a4, also trying to stop b5, then he weakens the b4 square, which we're going to use. We'll play knight c6, heading towards the b4 square, f4, and knight b4. Knight is sitting very well on b4, both putting pressure on the d3 bishop and helping black control the d5 square even more. After king h1, king h1 in general, always a useful move. Whenever white is a pawn on f4, the king should always get out of this diagonal just in case. King h1, and now it would be naive to allow f5 with bishop e6. So I recommend the move rook e8. Those who have studied the course in the previous chapters, they know I have a soft spot for this move. We try to be very flexible. If f5, we have always counterplay with d5. And after, for example, knight g3, yeah, now the knight has left e2 square, we can take on f4. White has to recapture with the bishop. And now we play bishop e6, intending d5. And an example line is queen f3, d5, e5, knight d7. And it's a very interesting position. At first, it looks as though white has pretty good pieces with the queen on f3, bishop on f4, bishop on d3, knight on g3, lots of attacking possibilities, you would think. But if you look closely, first of all, the bishop on d3 can always be captured by the b4 knight. And once black plays g6, which is what he will play on the next move, then the knight on g3 will be dominated. He can no longer go to h5 or f5. And all white has left is a weak e5 pawn. Next, we intend to play bishop f8, bishop g7, and start taking over. So I believe this position is very comfortable for black. Besides 9 h3 and 9 a4, and white can also play king to h1 and f4 as well. But after king h1, yeah, we can play knight bd7, send the knight to c5, and after knight g3, knight c5. Knight is doing pretty well on c5, putting pressure on the e4 pawn, potentially ready for a trade on d3 at any moment. And if white plays f4, it's not clear what else to do. After b5, we transpose to 9 f4, which we'll look at in a second. And after knight f4, yeah, we play b5. Here, most players play a3, but that would be just a waste of time. We'll follow up with knight d7, knight c5 anyway. So knight g3 first is more accurate. Knight bd7 now. And here, yeah, white can play king h1 again before knight d5 is there. So there's no need to defend yet. Knight c5. Yeah, now finally, white plays a3, as before it started becoming a realistic idea. And after a3, there are many ways for black to play, but I like this solution of knight takes d3 quite a bit. If white takes with the queen, after bishop e6, we'll have a very comfortable position. We just snatch the bishop pair, bishop c4 is in the position, we have nothing to complain. And after cd, here I like this very clever intermezzo with bishop g4 first. And the idea is that if white plays natural queen e1, now after bishop e6, we are ready to meet f5 with bishop b3, when we have this very nice square on b3, and bishop from b3 supports this d5 push in the center. If white plays a bit more clever with 14 queen c8, we can play even bishop e6, allow f5, and then drop the bishop back to d7. But I like even more to start with bishop d7, when it's not easy for white to decide what to play. After f5, we'll obviously start with the d5 counterplay, rook c8 followed by bishop c6, pushing the d pawn forward. And yeah, we'll have lots of counter players. The e4 pawn is quite weak, and in fact the knight on g3 is also quite misplaced. So I believe, yeah, this is very fine for black. It's f4 push, never too harmful when the bishop is still on c8, so nothing new here. In fact, the main move, as already mentioned, is knight g3. Here, besides the natural the main line bishop e6, which is what I recommend, black has a few options. I had included a very interesting move, bishop g4, once against Sergei Karyakin. It was a rapid game, and I wanted to take him out of book, and I managed. So after bishop g4, I'm trying to provoke something, some concession. f3 weakens this diagonal, a7 g1 diagonal quite a bit, while bishop e2 also changes the position somewhat after bishop e6. Now after knight d5, the bishop is much more passive on e2 than it is on d3. After, for example, knight d5, ed, and bishop c8. And after bishop e2, bishop e6, Sergei played slowly with bishop e3 and a4 and so on. And the position was around the level after the opening. So bishop g4 definitely a possibility. Also, Alireza Firouzja played against Karyakin the move, I believe, rook e8. Also an interesting waiting move. But I think bishop e6 is fine. Now, 10 knight d5 is what they play. There's no other critical continuation. Now, f4 is not as great as the knight on g3 because we can just take the pawn. White cannot recapture with the knight anymore. And besides knight d5, it's not clear what other active ideas white has. So knight d5 is what they usually play. And here I propose two different options. I look at the main line, bishop d5, but also interesting is this new idea of actually falling for the trap with a knight takes d5, e5, bishop d5, and allowing bishop takes h7, king h7, queen d5, and it turns out that this position is not so clear. After knight c6, white does have a few attacking possibilities, but we have quite some long-term assets. We have this strong central pawns. Now let's look at the concrete variations. Well, white has three moves here that I consider: knight f5, queen f3 first, and also the positional move b3. If white plays queen f3, trying to switch the queen over to the king side, we play g6, and here white has a strong follow-up knight f5. We should not take on f5 because then king is too open after queen f5. White gives a bunch of checks and it has a strong attack with bishop h6 at some point. Here we should play a very strong move, queen c8. The idea of queen c8 is that compared to queen d7, after queen h3 check, king g8, knight h6, our queen on c8 would be protected by the rook, and we are not losing a queen. That's why after knight f5 we play queen c8. White has nothing better than takes on e7 because after queen h3, as I mentioned, king g8, knight h6, king g7, he has no more good follow-up, as the endgame is always very comfortable for black. In general, in these positions, white has to try to come up with some direct possibilities, because in the long term, our center pawns, of course, are worth quite something. In this position, white's best attempt is to take on e7, knight e7, and now try to use the dark squares on the king side with queen f6. Here we play knight f5. We sort of trap the queen on f6 for a trade. White plays a4, a very nasty idea. Rook a3, rook h3 is looming. So we go queen d8, just in time to trade queens. Bishop g5, queen f6, bishop f6. White still has our king in some sort of a mating net with rook a3, rook h3. Incoming, we play here rook f8. And after rook a3, we are in time with defense. We go king g8, rook h3, and now knight g7, stopping rook h8 checkmate. And next we want to play rook e6, kicking the bishop out, and in the endgame, the central pawns are finally going to matter. This is quite comfortable for black. Instead of 14 queen f3, white can also play 14 b3. This is a positional way of playing. White doesn't try to start a kingside attack. Instead, he wants to play in the center, try to control the d5 square. His plan is bishop a3, followed by rook a d1. We play f5, bishop a3. Now we go queen e8, prepare rook d8, switch the queen over to g6. In fact, it will be black who will start kingside initiative very soon. Rook a d1. After f4, we also play queen g6, reinforcing the f5 pawn. Rook a d1, queen g6. Now we're threatening f4, f3, so white should play rook d3. We go f4 nonetheless. White would love to have his knight on e4, of course, a beautiful square, but after f3 he is in quite some trouble here on the king side. Instead he will play 1892. Now the f3 square is under his firm control. He also threatens rook h3 check, and we have a very strong move here, rook f7, intending after rook h3 check to go king g8. And if white starts with c4, reinforcing the control of the d5 square, we have another very clever idea, rook h8. We want to drop the king back to g8, and the rook on h8 will suddenly be very active, and it will be black who has quite serious initiative on the king side. That is for 480p3. The most direct and the most straightforward try is obviously 14 knight f5. Here black has to be quite accurate with queen d7. Now white has two queen moves, queen f3 and queen d3. After 15 queen d3, we hide with the king to g8. Again, important not to fall for a g6, queen h3 trap, king g8, knight h6. This will lose a queen. This motif is something we should definitely be aware of. Play king g8 instead. Here white can try f4, trying to set up some sort of kingside initiative. But now we have to bring all our pieces to the king side, do a clever regroup. We start with queen e6. Queen is consolidating the 6th rank. We intend rook fe8, followed by bishop f6 or bishop f8. White plays c3 just to stop any knight d4 business. Rook fe8, queen h3. White intends rook f3, rook g3. Bishop f6. The bishop cements the king side, protecting the g7 pawn, also introducing the idea of knight e7. Rook f3, now we go knight e7. We are trying to trade as many pieces as we can, and in the long run we've got this strong pawn center. Knight e7, queen e7, and here white's last attempt at attack is f5. He wants to set up some sort of a queen h5, rook h3 mating idea, but we have a very clever defense. We play e4, rook g3, queen e5, and if white insists on queen h5, rook h3, we have this runway for the king, king f8, king e7, escaping. If white tries to go for bishop e3, intending bishop d4, now we can move with the queen to b5, getting out of bishop d4 and hitting the b2 pawn as well. So just in time, but a very good defensive technique with rook f8, bishop f6, knight e7. And as is always the case in these lines, at the end, when white's attack fails, we have these long-term assets in the center. So this stuff is really double-edged. Hitting queen f3 is also dangerous. Once again, intending queen h3, king g8, knight h6 business. Here we should protect our queen from all the tricks. Rook a d8, very important. Yeah, rook d1, white abandons the attempts to get any kingside attack going. But now we play g6. Knight takes e7. It's not clear what else to play. Already queen h3, king g8, knight h6 is no longer a thing. The queens will just be traded on d7. So after g6, white has to take on e7. And after queen e7, white has still the last attempt to pose us some problems on the king side with queen h3 check, king g8, and now queen h6. Very strong, stopping any f-pawn push and intending to swing with the rook over to h3 via d3. And here black has to show some precision. We play queen e8, a very strong move. And after rook d3, the point is to play f6. Now the queen from e8 protects the g6 pawn, and the king gets this space to run via f7. And after rook h3, there's no need to panic, although it looks like we're getting mated. But we have a very strong defense, rook d7, protecting from queen h7. And in case of checks, we can run away with the king, queen h8, king f7. A check from h7, we can go to e6. And the king is doing just fine on e6. We have very good light square control, and at some point we can always come back, of course. And as white doesn't really mate us in these lines, at the end of the day, we have the strong central pawns, and there is potential for a takeover. So I kind of like this system quite a bit. It's not been played yet. Yeah, very interesting idea, but of course a little risky. The main line, however, is 10 bishop takes d5. E takes d5, and now g6, stopping knight f5. And next we want to develop our b8 knight with knight bd7. White here has two moves, c4 and a4. Let me just, in general, talk about this position a little bit. The pawn structure is resemblant of the standard knight of pawn structure that we see also in the English attack, but this time it's a little bit different. The knight that is usually on b3 is now on g3, and that changes quite a bit. Now, for example, after c4, black's usual play in such positions when the knight is on b3 is to play on the king side, but after knight e8, intending bishop g5, white has a very strong response in bishop h6, knight g7, queen d2, stopping bishop g5, and after f5 goes f3, and now if we push with f4, white knight jumps to e4, which is a beautiful outpost, and otherwise white already intends to push on the queen side with b4 c5, and that is very unpleasant. And it seems as though knight on g3 is simply better than the one on b3, but there is also a backside to that. Black has now play on the queen side, which he didn't have in position with knight on b3, because now we sometimes prepare a rook b8 b5 idea, and whereas with the knight on b3, white would have idea of bishop d2 followed by knight a5, sending the knight to c6. Here with the knight on g3, there is very little the white can do against that. So although the structure is just the same, the fact that the knight is not on b3 but on g3, it really changes everything, and this position is now completely different. So here we usually play for knight d7, rook b8 b5 idea, play on the queen side. And I believe I've studied the position in quite great depth, and it seems to be fine for black. But let's look at it move by move. For starters, instead of c4, white can play 12 a4. White's idea is to first push the pawn to a5 and only then take space. We have seen this concept before. We play here knight bd7, white goes a5. Now white has secured the dark squares. He wants to start pushing. Here black has a lot of different options. It's interesting to push h5 on the king side. In general, this theme is something we'll see here. Knight on g3 is vulnerable to the h5, h4 push. And also possible to play b5, which was what Volokitin played against Van Foreest, who played this move a4. But the one I recommend is the move 13 knight takes d5. It's the most direct move, capturing the pawn. Now after bishop takes g6, ag queen d5, we have an even better version of the knight d5 line that we looked at. Our pawn is already on g6, limiting the knight, and after queen c7 followed by queen c6, we have very good control of the center squares. So bishop g6 is not really a thing. White should probably include bishop h6 first, rook e8, and now bishop g6 once again is the same story. We take at queen c7, and the most critical move is bishop e4. Here, proposed move knight c7 is a very strong move. The idea is that on c7 the knight protects the a6 pawn. After bishop b7 we have rook b8 now, and after bishop to c6, pinning the d7 knight, we have knight e6. The knight is activating itself by the e6 square, sometimes jumping to d4 or f4 squares. And yeah, this position is quite unclear, but it seems that it's fine for black. White plays knight e4, bringing the knight to the center. We play queen c7, protecting d6, hitting the bishop. Bishop d5. Now we should trade the active knight with knight f6. White takes on f6. We take on f6, and here we have to fight for the d5 square. Is very important, but it seems that the variations work out for us. For example, b3. The pawn on b2 was hanging. b3, now knight d4, not only hitting the c2 pawn, but also trying to disrupt the connection between the queen on d1 and the bishop on d5. Now white can play bishop c4, threatening c3, but here we are just in time. We need to control this vital d5 square. We play queen b7, and after c3 we have d5. very strong punch. Now after d5, suddenly our pawn structure looks a lot more beautiful with these pawns on e5 and d5, and after c takes d4, d takes c4, position gets simplified, and black is perfectly fine. So it seems that this knight takes d5 capture works out for us, and a4 is not something we should fear. The main line is c4, and now knight bd7. Yeah, this is a very interesting tabia. White has lots of different moves, but the main thing to remember is that we have this b8, b5 idea. Let's look at all the moves one by one. King h1 is a very useful move in case of a potential f4. The king is always happy to step out of the a7, g1 diagonal. Here we play rook b8. As promised, we're going for the b5 push. And now I looked at two options. White can stop the b5 push when we can fight for this beautiful dark squares with a5, but this is not so simple. Of course, we have this blockade on the queen side, but it's not so easy. White also has lots of pieces on the queen side, and it's not given that we are the ones attacking on the king side just yet. But still, I think in terms of practical play, it is black who has an easier play. It must be very unpleasant for white to see this knight appearing on c5, and I think the position is pretty good for black. The other idea is knight e8 here. We'll see it also later. Point being that we want to play bishop g5, and after bishop h6, knight g7, queen d2, which is white's usual reaction. Here we can now play a5 and stabilize this dark squares with control over b4 and c5, and the knight is coming to c5 as well. So quite a clever inclusion, this knight e8, knight g7 here, but direct a5 is also possible. 480p3 is sort of a general strengthening move suggested by the engine. Now we hit him with b5. Whenever white takes on b5, the d5 pawn is quite weak. So here I look at the move f4, but f4 is always double-edged. On one hand, white opens the f-file, tries to create some initiative. On the other, it allows black to get this strong knight on e5 after takes, knight e5. And this position gives black a lot of potential because we can regroup with knight fd7, establish dominance on the e5 square. And with all this dark square control, white is running quite some risk. And currently we're threatening b takes c4, creating weakness on c4 as well. So I believe this is a very fine position for black. But let's look at a few other options. 13 rook b1 is also one. It's a clever waiting move. Now we can again play rook b8 and threatening b5. White has the option of b4. Now if we play simply b5, white has a4 idea, which is quite strong. After bc4, bishop c4, our a6 pawn is a little bit lonely. Instead of b5, I propose a5 first. This is very clever to include that. If white, of course, lets our a pawn to be traded for the b pawn, we get this strong control over the c5 square. So white should play a3. But now we take and play b5. And having gotten rid of the a6 weakness, this is of course much more comfortable now. After we trade the b5 pawn for the c4 pawn, the d5 pawn will become quite weak, and white's passed b pawn will do us no damage as it will be firmly blocked on the b6 square. Hikaru Nakamura played a very clever move a3 here against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and Jan reacted very unfortunately here. He played a knight c5, and after bishop c2, b5, before he realized that after the planned knight cd7, white has a strong idea c5, and he cannot take because of d6. This was very unfortunate, and she should have improved on move 13 after a3. Now, if we play rook b8 after b4, white has a better version of the 13 rook b1 move. a5 no longer comes with the tempo, so that was Hikaru's main idea. But here, I believe very strong move is move h5. Now a3 turns out to be quite useless after king h1, intending f4, universally useful move. Now we hit him with h4, knight e2, and here there are a lot of different options, but I like the direct move e4. And if white drops the bishop back, it's pretty much the same to c2 or b1. We react with rook c8, attack the c4 pawn, get this extra move rook c8 for free, and after b3 we push b5. C takes b5, a takes b5, and now the d5 pawn has been isolated and quite weak. White is not in time to go knight d4, knight c6 because we pick up the d5 pawn. And next we want to play rook to e8, bishop to f8, and bishop to g7, further reinforcing and securing our king. And in terms of positional factors, I think we're doing quite well here. So very clever idea by Hikaru, but after a3, yeah, h5, pretty good improvement. And finally, 13th b3, yeah, it's just a waiting move similar to king h1. We play rook b8. Now, if white plays king h1, we are transposing the same thing. Like king h1, rook b8, b3, yeah, we go b5, f4, takes knight e5. So after b3, rook b8, we should look at a4, and now similar to king h1, we can either play direct a5 or this clever knight e8 move, bishop h6, knight g7, and white either has to allow us to trade the bishops or get his queenside blocked this way. Now finally we should look at the main, most popular move, that is the move bishop h6. I'm not sure it's the most dangerous, but it's been played the most. We play rook e8, of course, and here White's in his first game, in the very first game in this line, White played b4, and Nair Wojtaszek played in Batumi 2018 European Championship. Wojtaszek reacted very well. He played bishop f8, hitting the bishop. White, of course, dodges the trade. Bishop g5, h6, continuing to chase the bishop, and after bishop d2, e4, very strong. Again, a tempo move, and the c4 pawn is now quite weak, and h5, h4 is also in the air, hitting the g3 knight. Black had a very good counterplay here and went on to play a good game. Instead of b4, players improved with rook c1. And here, bishop f8 was played in Anand against Kamer. This is also quite playable for black, but later Wojtaszek improved on this game with knight c5, which was a pretty good idea. So I think that's what we'll go with. Now white has three options. He can drop the bishop back to c2 or b1, or he can just push through with his plan with b4, allow us to trade. But now after we trade a5, we'll start to create some counterplay against the b4 pawn. After a5, a3, we take on b4, and play queen b6, hitting the pawn. And if white tries to consolidate his queenside with queen b3, then we have a very strong idea, queen a7, and we intend queen a3, queen a4, try to bother him on the queen side and not allow white to consolidate and push with c5. This gives black excellent counterplay, so instead of b4, white should consider moving the bishop back. The moves are quite similar. After both bishop 1 and bishop c2, we play a5. Let's look at bishop c2 first, a5. The idea is that we want to stop white from advancing on the queen side, or at least slow it down quite a bit. Now, if white plays a3 after a4, he will not be able to connect his pawns anymore. Instead, white usually goes b3, intending now to follow up with a3 before. If white tries to be clever with the move bishop d2, then we get to hit him with h5, h4 as well, so it's almost so simple. If queen goes b3, move 16, we play rook b8. Very important now, after a3, we are in time to play b5. And if white plays 17, f4, then we have bishop f8 here. And after bishop g5, we go e4, rook f4, and knight cd7. And we'll see a very similar position with the bishop on b1. So let's actually do that. 15 bishop b1. Again, the same thing, a5. Slow down that b4 push. b3 now rook b8. If a3, again, we are in time with b5. And if f4, here there are two options. There is the bishop f8, which I like quite a bit. And there is the Wojtaszek move, e takes f4. Wojtaszek seemed to be well prepared in that game, so that is also a good solution. In general, in this structure, as I mentioned, f4 is a very double-edged idea. On one hand, white opens the f-file and gets some attacking possibilities. On the other, he gives black this strong e5 square for the knight, which could have long-term consequences that are not in white's favor. After f4, we can play bishop f8, as I said, and e4. So let's look at bishop f8 first. Bishop g5, e takes f4. rook takes f4, and now knight cd7. And here we have to perform some very impressive calculation to secure our knight on f6. After queen f3, we go bishop g7, rook f1, and now it appears that white has managed to put a lot of pressure on our f6 knight, but we are just in time with a very strong regroup. First we go queen b6 check, we get out of the pin, and after king h1, we have a strong move knight e5, forcing the queen to move, and after queen moves, we play knight fd7. We're just in time to regroup, get the knight out of f6, have the f7 pawn protected, and now we can finally breathe. And next it's a4 followed by a takes b3 and activating this rook. And it is black who is having all the fun. White can try spectacular knight h5 here, but first of all, we can simply play bishop h8 when it's not clear what white has achieved. But also the capture only leads to equality for white. After queen h5, knight f8, rook f7, knight f7, queen f7, king h8, bishop f6, the line after takes, king g8, queen f7 check, king h8 only leads to perpetual. But again, just knight h5, bishop h8. So I think a very good solution, but let's also for completeness sake look at the game of Wojtaszek. He took on f4, and after bishop f4 played b5, activating his b8 rook. White went queen f3, setting up some pressure along the f-file. Black took on c4, bc4, rook takes c4, and rook d4, trading an active rook. White with bishop d2, similar as after rook takes b4, black just takes. It leads to similar positions. Again, black has all these dark squares. And after bishop d2, Wojtaszek took rook c4, bc4, and played knight cd7. Typical and a very strong regroup. The knight is now heading towards the e5 square and currently protects the f6 knight. And Nepo added the pressure with bishop c3. And here Wojtaszek gave a check, and after king h1 played a very strong move, rook f8. White was already ready to put the pressure on the f-file with knight e4 when the f7 pawn would be hanging. But now after rook f8, black protects that f7 pawn. And here Jan played queen f4, trying to add the pressure, perhaps threaten knight f5. And black already has a choice, and Wojtaszek played move bishop d8. And here, after spending a lot of time, Jan finally just played the move h3 and offered a draw. As he said in the press conference, he was already quite concerned about this position because long term, of course, as an experienced knight player, he saw the long-term danger for white. Black has very good dark square control. The c4 pawn is quite weak. We have the c5, e5 squares, and so Jan was already quite content with the draw. But if he tried 26 knight f5, which would be a lot more dangerous looking, he probably saw that this doesn't give him anything. But still, there is equality there. After knight f5, we should take on f5, bishop f5, and we should play knight e5, neutralize the bishop. And now white has some follow-up, but it's only enough for equality. He can give a check on g5, king h8, queen h6, hits the f8 rook, rook g8, and now bishop c2, threatening rook f6 and queen h7 mate. Here black goes rook g7, protects from mate, and after rook f6, bishop f6, queen f6, we can play queen e3, forcing a perpetual because the bishop on c3 is attacked, and also queen c1 is a potential checkmate. So here white can just repeat moves. In fact, two ways for black to defend after this 17 f4. Personally, I thought bishop f8 looked more reliable, but in both cases, black has to be very resourceful. Here, this queen b6, knight e5, knight fd7 sequence, and there the strong knight cd7, queen b6, rook f8. But the good thing is, once we defend, long-term factors are in our favor, and this dark square control is very important. I believe that sums up the bishop d3 system. We looked at quite a bit. So after bishop d3, e5, knight e2, bishop e7 castle. We looked at first of all bishop e6, and after f4, we're going for this structure, and then this important plan of knight fd7, bishop g5, without the move rook c8, and against the 8 castle, knight g3, bishop e6, knight d5 idea. We also looked at two options, One is to just go for it and take the pawn on d5, allow bishop h7, which was very interesting from a strategic point of view, and also the main line bishop d5, ed, and g6, where, as we had seen, black gets quite good counterplay thanks to this b5 idea. So all in all, quite fascinating stuff. As I mentioned at the beginning, not the most common variation at the club and amateur level, but these things change. I believe with so many top players playing this, it will also become popular at the club level and the amateurs. I'm sure we'll catch up following their favorite streamer, perhaps Hikaru, who had good results here, or some other top players. Everybody played it already. Vishanand did, Suke Karak, and many other players. So I'm sure we'll see a lot more of bishop d3, but I think for now you are more than well equipped. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next chapter.